This is the Village of Riverside Board of Trustees regular meeting for Thursday, October 19th, 2017. The time is 7 p.m. Please call the roll.
President Sells.
Here.
Trustee Pollack.
Here.
Trustee Giza.
Here.
Trustee Lumsden.
Here.
Trustee Ballerine.
Here.
Trustee Setterby.
Here.
Trustee Peters.
Here.
Village Manager Francis.
Here.
Village Attorney Mars.
Here.
Also present Village Clerk Haley.
Thank you. Please rise.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you and good evening. Welcome to everyone who's here tonight and those of you watching at home. I'm sure you're watching us instead of the Cubs, so I'm sure we have a big viewership this evening. If you would like to address the board at any time, I just ask that you be recognized by the president and you make your comments from the podium so that the folks at home can hear and see what you have to say. First up is public comment. Would anyone like to address the board? Hearing none, we'll move on to reports. Do I see someone? Oh, Mr. Whiteduck, I'm sorry.
Good evening. My name is Jack Whiteduck, 165 Bartram Road. I'm always pleased to come and speak with you. Nice to see some new faces up here at the board, finally, and particularly your new equipment. I'm telling you, it's very, very impressive. The reason I am here tonight is to call your attention to a program that is going to be conducted next Tuesday night at 7 o'clock, 7 to 8:30, in the North Riverside Village Common meeting area. It is a program on the subject of domestic violence. I passed out a little brochure. You've probably seen some of these popping up around town. And we wanted to call not only the board's attention to this program, but also the community's attention. So I'm taking advantage of being on, I guess, Channel 6. Is it still Channel 6 that we're on? To call the community's attention to this. Just a little background on the program. This is a program that actually has been in process for several years. It is grown out of an activity from St. Mary's Parish in Riverside on the topic of domestic violence. And it's actually a part of a wider archdiocesan program to call attention to this scourge that is addressed, that actually affects our entire nation. This program we're not trying to solve the problem. We're trying to call attention to the fact that it is a problem and to help people find the resources, both victims and perpetrators, to try to deal with this problem. I think it's unlikely that anybody in this room probably hasn't had some experience with someone who has been the subject of domestic violence. It isn't just beating your wife. It's all kinds of things. It's financial, it's emotional, whatever it might be that causes people to harm one another and make it difficult for them to live. This is a program that we are trying to address. Again, it is not a church-sponsored program. I want to assure you of that. It is a program that is bringing some specialists in, doctors, some social agencies. And I'd also like to point out that in addition to St. Mary's actually being, I guess, kind of the convener, the committee from St. Mary's, we have over 40 community organizations that have signed on to help sponsor or support this activity. And again, this year, we reached out beyond Riverside. As you see, we're holding the program in North Riverside, but we have people in organizations from Lyons, North Riverside, Berwyn, Brookfield, Forest View, just to name a few. So again, the program is going to be on Tuesday, October 24th, from 7 to 8:30 in the North Riverside Commons, which is located at 2401 Des Plaines Avenue in North Riverside. There's plenty of parking. There's access for the handicapped, plenty of room. It's free. It's informational, and for any of our friends who require a Spanish translation, that will also be available. So again, if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. Otherwise, I hope to see you on Tuesday.
Any questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Wyatt.
Okay.
Would anyone else like to address the board? Just to follow up on what President Wyduck said, everyone knows what a serious situation this is, domestic violence. If you know anyone who you think might benefit from this program, reach out to them. Reach out to them and get them to go to this program. It's a vital importance. And if you want more information, you can find it online at dv@stmaryriverside.org. dv@stmaryriverside.org. Next up is reports of village offices. I have no report this evening. Manager Francis.
I do not have a report this evening as well.
So moving on to the approval of the consent agenda. First is the approval of voucher list of bills October 19th, 2017, and file and review the following. Village Board of Trustee regular meeting minutes October 5, Community Development Department monthly report September 2017, Finance Department monthly report September 2017, Fire Department monthly report September 7, 2017, and a resolution authorizing the village manager to enter into a sales agreement with Paul Conway Shields for the purchase of 10 sets of firefighter turnout gear in an amount not to exceed $21,950. Are there any items that anyone needs pulled for discussion? Hearing none, I ask for a motion and a second to approve.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Satterby.
Second.
Second by Mr. Pollock. Please call the roll.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Trustee Giza.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Sutterby.
Aye.
Trustee Peters.
Aye.
Motion carries. Next are reports of departments, commissions, and trustee liaisons. Are there any liaison reports this evening? Hearing none, we'll move on. I would ask permission from the board to reorder the agenda. We have four or five ordinances to discuss this evening, but we also have a presentation by the Economic Development Commission's branding concept firm by Point B. So I'd ask that we reorder it so we could hear from them first, if that's okay. Director Apt, would you like to introduce our guest?
Yes, as you know, the village has been working with Point B Communications since early 2016. They are our marketing consultant as we're working through the branding process. The EDC has been working with them very closely, and we are at the brand articulation phase. As you know, they were before you, not this past summer, but the summer of 2016 with our new logo. They helped the village with our business collateral, coming out with our new business cards and our letterhead and everything for the village. And the EDC has been working with them on how do we articulate now this logo, this brand, our point A recap kind of information with our positioning statement and our long-term strategic competitive advantages. And how do we meld that together and come up with kind of our brand concept. So they've been working with the EDC. The EDC is kind of worked through this process with them and has made their recommendation, which Point B will be kind of taking you through that process, how we got to where we're at, and kind of go over why we went with what we went with. Christine Herbst, our chairperson from the Economic Development Commission, is here, as is actually Kate as well, who's on our Economic Development Commission, that can also, if you have any questions or want them to provide some feedback, is kind of where the Commission's headspace is at with this. They are here as well. Okay. And I will turn it over to Hamish and Rob from Point B.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be before you again. We're grateful for the agenda shuffle. Hopefully it's not the last Cubs game we'll see this season, but just in case, it'd be nice to get home for a little bit. So, what we're going to do today is just very quickly recap what you guys are aware of is the Point A process we went through. We think it's important to understand that the underpinnings that were really germane in developing the concepts that we're going to be sharing with you in a moment. So just as a refresher, we went through a process with the Economic Development Committee. That's called our Point A process. Through that process, let's make sure this works. I'll just hit some of the highlights. We went through a quick visualization process where we identified images and words that were meaningful. We thought to our constituents and prospective constituents and stakeholders. We went through an exercise that helped us visualize and understand the personality of the Riverside brand. This wasn't a consultative approach. The people in the committee were instrumental in helping to determine this brand personality, and everything that we developed was designed to be in keeping with the personality that we developed. So it's up on the screen here. I won't go through it all because it would take quite some time. We talked about who our audiences were, an equal mix of businesses, especially relocating businesses, new business owners looking to locate or relocate in Riverside, and then also visitors hoping to to shop, buy, dine in Riverside. And then, of course, our residents were also an important component, although they might not be. Our messaging may not be quite as heavy directed at that crowd. And this just walked through in detail, a detailed definition of who that audience was. We took a look at our neighboring communities and those that we think we would want to compare ourselves against to determine where our core strengths might lie relative to them. So we looked at a variety of communities, and we took a handful of attributes: awareness, character and history, environmental focus, design and architecture, etc. And we as objectively as possible, with the committee, discussed how we sat relative to those other communities. That allowed us to become aware of certain areas where Riverside really shined brightly. We went through another exercise where we asked the committee to write a review as if they were reviewing on a review site what Riverside was like, what was great about it, and perhaps what are the things that possibly could be improved. And we got some great feedback, which is highlighted here. Certainly the architecture, the design of the city, the quiet, friendly neighborhood, the lack of traffic lights, family friendliness, all were really important and reiterated with frequency. And then from there we got to one of the most germane components of the exercise, where we identified our LTSCAs, long-term competitive sustainable advantages. And we came to 3. And I'll only read the top part, and I won't read this part right now just for brevity. But number 1, from its very inception, Riverside was designed to harmoniously coexist with its natural surroundings, providing visitors and residents with an idyllic, tranquil retreat. Number 2, Riverside is truly unique in its ability to provide residents a safe, quiet, charming small town which rests just minutes from one of the nation's largest metropolises. And number 3, Riverside is a truly unique community with an architectural and historical pedigree that surpasses that of many better-known communities throughout Illinois. These 3 LTSCAs serve as our pillars in all of our communication. And I think the committee worked really hard, and I remember the days and discussions that followed to make sure that these really rang true for the village. Then we got to a positioning statement, which I'll read briefly. It's one of the nation's first planned suburban communities and one of only 2 villages in the state designated as an arboretum. Riverside is truly the hidden gem of suburban Cook County. Its incomparable design, pastoral setting, and unparalleled small-town ambiance offers its residents, business owners, and visitors alike the chance to experience the kind of safe, neighborly, American small-town life that has all but disappeared in today's modern world. And from there we went on to what we characterize as a brand manifesto, 30-second elevator speech. Tell me about Riverside. What's Riverside about? And this is the last thing I'm going to read to you, I promise. There was a time when the world community was more than just a place. It was a feeling, a sense of belonging to something that was truly special and all your own. In the village of Riverside, that sense of community is still alive and well in the winding streets and the green open spaces first laid out by Frederick Law Olmsted over 140 years ago. From its unique architectural heritage to its warm, neighborly small-town ambiance, everything about this truly unique community tells its residents, business owners, and visitors alike that they are experiencing something that is truly one of a kind. These were all very important underpinnings for us to then go ahead and develop. Then to develop the creative that was designed to align with these findings. So we went through a brand articulation process. Through that process, we developed 3 concepts to share with the committee. And after a lot of discussion, deliberation, several meetings, they ended up landing on one, which they felt best articulated and visualized the findings of our brand discovery process. So this is what that initial presentation looked like. The concept that they chose was one called Get Off the Grid. When you cross the border into Riverside, you immediately realize you're not just entering another town, you're entering a new way of thinking. It's a town created not just as a place to live, but as a place to live in harmony with the world around you. When even the streets curve and meander, inviting you to slow down and enjoy the beauty that lies all around. In Riverside, life isn't laid out in standard grids, but in immeasurable opportunities for you, your family, and your business. Here, you don't have to imagine the possibilities, you can just live them. Get off the grid. So this concept was so germane and so much of what we talked about, the very structure that Olmsted envisioned for the community. And when you look on a Google map, when you see the disruption in the grid that's all around us, Riverside is very different in that way. So there's a literal interpretation to the concept of get off the grid, but there's quite certainly a figurative concept here too. This is something different. It's not your typical community. If you're looking for a change of pace for your business or your place to shop or dine, this is where you want to be. This is what it looked like. For prospective business owners, you love what you do, now love where you do it. Get off the grid. And we use the actual grid in the Olmsted map as part of the design of the creative. Follow your own road to success. Get off the grid. And whenever possible, we show imagery of prospective store owners. We would love these to be, by the way, real, our real store owners, real shop owners. These are stock photos right now, but we're looking forward to making these come to life with real imagery. Certainly, we do use our iconic water tower and downtown streets whenever possible. You've never been one to follow the crowd. Get off the grid. So this is the original ad campaign that we shared. We also shared a handful of other materials that fell in keeping with this concept. And then we went through a series of revisions based on feedback we received from the committee. So this is an evolution of that, where we looked at different typography, different layouts, different ways to treat this. This is the initial presentation. Here is an alternative version that we shared. And yet a different, slightly different version. So actually, this is round 1 feedback, and then after feedback from that, we came to this round 2 feedback, where we got more feedback, ultimately then leading to the current campaign. So these are 3 ads that you're seeing here, but this is really a campaign that's intended to be extended throughout any series or types of materials, whether it's a billboard, online digital banner, a local poster, an e-blast. There's extensions that really can take us very far. That's all I got.
Trustees, any comments, questions from Mr. Grissom? Mr. Ball?
I'm not sure where to begin with the platitudes. I think it's just phenomenal. I love the get off the grid. I think that's great. And the mimicking of the curved streets in the ads. I think that's wonderful.
Any more comments like that? Thank you, thank you.
It is important to note as well that what you're seeing here, just one thing I want to add here, what you're seeing here, yes, these are all business-focused treatments for this. It would absolutely extend to the different target audiences of residents and potential visitors as well, with different lines of copy and different imagery, but following that same template.
I have a question. I really like the map correlation, but if I'm a business owner, what's the response going to be to a business owner for saying, as a business owner, I don't want to be off the grid? What's the response?
Great question, and it was subject of a lot of conversation between us and the committee. And I think one of the most salient comments there is, regardless of what we show here, it's a fact. You know, this is what Riverside is. It is meandering streets. It is quite literally a disruption to the grid around us. So whether or not we share it here, it's something that is I think a lovely, wonderful reality. But for some people who say, look, I want someone who's driving straight on a road to be able to instantly pass my store, whether or not it's described in the ads, it's going to be a reality when they get on our streets. So, but it certainly was a point of commentary. You know, is it a bad thing to get off the grid? But you know, we're trying to articulate it in a way that says, shake things up, do things different. But it was a good point of comment. So I think it's a good comment. Good question.
I agree with Trustee Pollack. I love the copy. Next step is identifying how to best get the message out, what medium we use, or what are your preliminary thoughts on that?
That is indeed our next step, is to develop a marketing plan based on this creative platform. And once again, we'll work closely with the committee, understanding what budget might exist to extend our message to our audiences, make sure that our weighting is correct, and then we will suggest, and there's a process involved, we'll present a strategy first, and then upon modification and approval of that strategy, then we present a detailed plan. That strategy will outline the type of mediums we're recommending, the weighting of each of those mediums, and the timing of each of those mediums. So what, where, and when for each of them. And if it's like most plans we develop, it's very dependent on the budget. It will have digital components, probably out-of-home components, maybe traditional marketing and advertising components too, direct marketing. So that's our next step. We're excited about it.
So the question for all of us tonight then is whether we want to recommend that the Economic Development Committee moves forward now into this next phase where they will start implementing, bringing back an implementation plan to us for consideration.
I just want to say before, you guys did a fantastic job. I want, for the record and for the Economic Development Commission's perspective, thank you so much for what you've done. And I know that they are excited, and so hopefully those that are watching at home will get excited about the direction that this is taking us. So again, thank you so much before we move on.
Thank you. The agency's only as good as its client, and you guys, you're really tremendous folks to work with, so it made a big difference.
Yeah, just as, and I'm sure I was at some of the communications you had with the commission. I know how much you've already heard this, but one of the things that we particularly are focusing on as part of our kind of strategic plan is making sure that we increase our outreach to the city, especially given our train access and our proximity to the city. Mm-hmm. So I would just ask that you keep that, and I know it's in these materials. Sure. But to the degree that that can be brought into this as well, just reminding our neighbors in Chicago how close we are, and they're welcome to come on out.
Could you give me an idea of specifically what type of, how would you get this word out? Trade shows, TV. I mean, it seems like how is a prospective business going to see this?
I'm going to give you an unsatisfactory answer. We've especially this time of year. This is our planning season. We've been spending the last 2 months just entrenched in different types of media vehicles and right fits for the audience and also for the budget. It's a difficult question to answer before we understand the resources that we have to work with. Our recommendation for one size budget may be very different, much more tactical, pinpoint, than for a different size budget, which may be able to involve a lot more awareness components. So one size budget may have us doing large highway billboards, metro advertising, significant targeted digital stuff, even video, digital video, which could be delivered into people's homes and onto their desktops. A different size budget may have us be much more precise and pinpoint, only looking at our surrounding communities. We'd love to go into Chicago. Chicago's a pretty big market, and to make a dent in that market, you need to go in with some heft. So if we felt in our estimation that our resources didn't allow for that, then we might recommend really trying to bring neighboring community residents into our neighborhoods for commerce. So the shorter answer is when we develop our strategy, that's when we'll be able to make a real recommendation and support that recommendation by more than just top of mind ideas. It's a pretty hefty document that has a lot of good substance to it, and I'm sure we'll be before you again when that comes up. So you'll have certainly a chance to see our thinking.
And I also think one of the things that the Economic Development Commission has been doing is trying to think about creative ways to do that with a limited budget. One of the things we've talked about is working with realtors who see every day who's coming in to Riverside. And there are places in Chicago that are specifically being drawn to Riverside, certain locations. And so how can we pinpoint and target those locations by working with the realtors? And there's other ways that we've been working with them as well. So we're trying to do this on both fronts, I think, from the commission perspective, working with local folks who also know who is coming here and what is working, what's being successful.
Yeah, there's a lot of tools out there, and they're just each one of them has its right place, and again, if we're working with a tighter budget, social media channels may be a significant venue for us. They're more economical. Even the paid advertising versions of social media channels are more economical than other channels. They don't reach our entire audience, and that's a challenge. But they reach. They're very efficient in the way they reach our channels. So it will be exciting to see the whole plan. And some of that plan may be things that you guys are doing without our assistance, but that we would still consider in our own recommendations. So that'll happen after our discovery.
Anything else? Mr. Paul?
I just wanted to say again, I like this a lot. And as we're talking, it's striking me what I like so much about Get Off the Grid. And that's that, for years we've been hearing about our weaknesses as a village, our economic development weaknesses. We're isolated, it's hard to get around, we're off the grid. This is turning that into strength, as it should be. And I think the questions about how does a potential business react to that are very legitimate. I'm glad to hear that there's a lot of discussion about that. But I guess my thought on that is we don't need to mass market. We're small. We only need a handful of really good businesses to come to town. And I'm sure there are plenty of businesses who would say, yeah, I'd love to be off the grid and still in the middle of the grid. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Trustee Pollock, because if you look at our current businesses, successful businesses, they totally fit the kind of personality profiles that you mentioned in your run up to this. They're creative, they're artistic, they're artisanal. I mean, they fit our community, and that's why they work. Mm-hmm. So, and those are the kind of businesses that will always work here, and the people. That's who's going to be drawn to this kind of program. I thought it was a wonderful work.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Anything else for Mr. Grusin or Mr. McDonald? Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
So I take it they have a go ahead to move forward with this? Yes, yes, yes. Okay, great. And for those of you at home, on our agenda You can see the full presentation that you probably couldn't read on your screen tonight, starting at page 85. It's really worth a close read. It's wonderful.
I don't think we had the copy included though. Can we make sure that that gets added to the website?
This copy?
Yeah.
This copy I think was not. We'll see to it that that's added. We'll put this up on our website so that people can find it easily.
We'll put it as a trending item.
It'll be as a trending item on our website because we're trending. Okay, back to the hard work now. Ordinances and resolutions. First up is a resolution authorizing execution of a license agreement for temporary use of public property, operation of a pop-up retail sales location for Chocolate Twist LLC, doing business as Chocolate Twist. Ms. Adams.
Or I'm handling
Oh, you're
that.
going to do this one?
Yes.
Okay.
Just as a recap, as previous board action, last year, the board had approved a license agreement with Chocolate Twist to have a pop-up in the train station. It was very successful. Based on timing and looking for a long-term tenant, it actually works out having Chocolate Twist because we have Holiday Stroll. We have some work that needs to be done at the train station, but that would not begin until January. And so based on that timing, it is available for utilization. And speaking with the owner of Chocolate Twist, they have agreed to open up the train station at 5:30 a.m. for commuters, so that relieves village staff of that burden. And so based on that, I'm recommending the approval of this license agreement from November 15th, 2017 through the end of the year, December 31st of 2017.
So I'd ask for a motion and a second to approve the resolution.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Lumsden, second by Mr. Pollack. Any discussion, questions? Please call the roll.
Trustee Pollak.
Aye.
Trustee Giza.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Sutton.
Aye.
Trustee Peters.
Aye.
Motion carries. Next up is, and thank you, Ms. Coffey, for coming this evening. Queen Twist is here with us. Next up is
no
in.
samples.
You know what, I'll tell you what, I'll meet you at 5:30 the first day.
There's a reason.
Next up is an ordinance amending the Village Code of the Village of Riverside, Illinois, relative to the display of banner signs in parks and accompanying banner policy. Ms. Francis.
This part of the village code was previously amended in 2015 when the village adopted the new sign code. Historically, the village has allowed for banners to be displayed for various community activities and for public information. The banners were displayed by attaching them to trees in Guthrie with rope. At times, the village would display banners for public information in Centennial Plaza. However, temporary poles were installed and removed for those particular displays. In late 2015, the village installed black ornamental poles in Guthrie and Centennial Plaza to display various banners. Currently, only village-related banners are displayed in Centennial Plaza. Examples are banners promoting parks and recreation activities, the sale of village vehicle stickers, and information on upcoming village-sponsored events and message in support of shopping local. All other banners are displayed in Guthrie. The proposed policy provides further guidance and examples for staff regarding eligible organizations and messages and events. This policy will ensure consistency of review and approval of banners. The ordinance and policy as drafted conforms to current practice and procedure.
So there's kind of two parts to this. The ordinance is before you is the part that we need to consider. And then assuming the ordinance is okay, then if we have comments with regard to the draft policy, we can talk about that as well. But why don't we get a motion and a second to approve the ordinance first?
So moved.
By Mr. Valerie.
Second.
Second by Mr. Setti. Any questions about the ordinance itself? Please call the roll on the ordinance.
Trustee Pollak.
Well, we're going to talk about the policy next. Yeah.
Aye.
Trustee Giza.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Sutton.
Aye.
Trustee Peters.
Aye.
So that motion carries. Now, with regard to, you see before you the draft policy, which is an administrative document. Are there any questions or comments from the trustees with regard to our draft policy?
I have a couple.
Mr. Valerie?
Page 1, I believe it's page 1. Banners shall contain no reference to a commercial sponsor. You know, we do have banners that when the Arts Center, or when RAW does their thing, or when maybe the Friends of Fourth, if we have sponsors that help do that. So I'd like to have the commercial sponsors stricken.
Is that okay with everybody? Okay.
Secondly is, I just want to make sure that everyone knows that the only place a banner could be placed is on those poles.
Correct.
Because banners have been placed on the train station rail and things like that. So just for clarification, I don't know if it has to be in here somewhere, but that the poles are the only place that banners can be placed.
That's correct. Mr. Pollock?
I'd like some discussion or clarification from staff, perhaps, regarding the term non-political. It seems like a pretty vague term to me. Is it defined somewhere? Who decides whether it's political or not?
Mr. Morris, can you address that?
It's not defined in what we have here. I looked at a number of policies in working with staff to craft this. I guess, you know, it would be up to staff to make that determination and to consistently apply whatever standards they're using to make that interpretation so as to be fair to everybody. We can take a run at defining it if you like, but it's the best I can do right now.
I understand the difficulty of it, but I also understand the trick bag we could get into. Someone claims, well, I'm not political. Who are you to say this is political? You know, and so I think maybe we need to dig into that a little bit.
I understand what you're saying, but for the life of me, I don't know how you could
I don't
define
either.
it. I mean, it seems to me, I mean, we have, yeah, I mean, obviously we have a way of, you know, you know, staff was to deny something based on the fact that it's political, and somebody thought it wasn't political, they can always bring it to us. But I think it's one of those kind of things where you know it when you see it, kind of thing. I just don't know how you could, it would be a circular definition, you know, any way you could try to define political, I think. But, I mean, what does everybody else think?
Are political organizations generally not-for-profit?
No.
Some are.
Some of us are not generous. Do you want to run through kind of the 501c3, the kind of the general categories of what usually falls under a not-for-profit organization?
Sure. So again, I know someone had raised with staff the 501c3 designation, and you know, again, that seemed to be a common theme in the different policies that we looked at in order to just kind of give some body to what makes an organization eligible. Incorporating as a 501c3 is something that's commonly done by organizations that raise funds and are not-for-profits. And so, for instance, we're looking at some prior to the meeting. Frederick Law Olmsted Society is a 501c3. I know RAW is. And so when we're thinking about the organizations that have traditionally used the banners, that we felt like we were kind of capturing that universe.
So I mean, if we take out the non-political and just say it has to be a Riverside affiliated 501(c)(3), and that, or these other community events or community announcements, or those are all pretty simple. It's just a non-political thing. So if we get rid of that altogether and just put Riverside 501(c)(3)s would basically be a few organizations in our churches.
Well, I think there's a lot of 501c3s that may be furthering political agendas.
That are political, yeah.
Yeah.
So when we talk about political campaigns, for instance, I don't know off the top of my head whether those are 501c3s, but that's different. And those are specifically called out further down. We say no references to political candidates, referenda, ballot question, political party. But here we're trying, further up, when we say non-political, we're trying to keep the use of the banners from becoming divisive through 501c3s that may be incorporated but are utilizing them to further a political message.
Well, and actually, you brought my attention to that sentence, and that does kind of define what we mean, where it says banners that advocate, et cetera, a social issue, called or event or prohibited. So that kind of does provide some definition of what we mean by non-political. So
I definitely think the non-political needs to remain there, and it needs to, and just everybody needs to know this is not a public forum for issues that are socially related. This is an information board to promote community. That's what we want to keep it at. We want to keep it that way. So I like the language. I like the non-political civic organization, and I like it further clarified down below, where it's very clear that that's not what it's used for.
The only thing I had was the on page, or agenda page 63 at the very bottom. It says eligible organization other than the village may only reserve space twice per calendar year. You know, I know juniors often will have more than two. I think RAC sometimes has more than two. So I wonder if we should just leave that at the discretion of staff to determine whether somebody's taken too many bites at the apple and not have a set number.
I would think that we'd want to structure it in a way that there is a limit if there's a high demand.
Well, and that would be staff's determination.
Yeah. In other words, if someone's used it for 2 weeks here and 2 weeks there, and the calendar's almost full, and there's competition for the remaining space,
right.
People who haven't had opportunity.
Somebody who hasn't had a chance would get to use it. Exactly.
Deference.
Yeah. And I think that's best handled. Because those are really the only two organizations I can think that might have more than two. So is that okay? Just take the two out. Okay. Anything else on this?
How'd you guys switch from 7 days to 2 weeks? Just curious. What was that being driven from?
It's been, and I can have Director Apt or fill in the blanks, or Director Melchiotti with regard to demands and requests that we've received. But I think it's just contingent upon the frequency in which we put out banners. Some of it, like for Raw, I believe it may be longer than that 7-day window, and it's just trying to get the information out. So it just depends on the calendar.
Organizations are asking to have it up a little bit longer.
Some of them are, depending on timing of event and what have you. So that's why I believe the 2-week was appropriate. But Director App, did you have something additional to add?
When the ordinance was originally written, at least that portion of the ordinance in the sign code is where it originally specified the 7 days. I think it's kind of evolved over time with more and more organizations wanting it for a little bit more time, maybe 2 weeks. And then it also just worked out on a timing basis for the Public Works Department and getting things up and getting things down, that sort of window worked a little bit better for them. So it's kind of been an evolving process over the years, whether it was the banners in the trees or now on our poles.
Mr. Wida?
I just have a practical question. It has to do with this program. We have something here that potentially could be a subject for banning. And this particular thing is designed, it really doesn't even say who it's sponsored by. It does give some supporting organizations. But because this is sponsored essentially by a church, where it came from, would this be the type of information that would be prohibited? I mean, I don't know. And it's sort of like, can the Presbyterian Church hang the sign to have the ice cream social? And it's a community event. So, I mean, this is sort of where you're going with this. And I understand the reasons why and all that, but I think I just think we need to be careful, don't, tie yourself up so tightly that you create opportunities for people to attack anything that goes up there, because if we do that, we might as well take the signs down.
Thank you. So last year there was an LGBTQ rainbow banner that was hung, and it was only up for a few days. I think they got it up late and took it down on time. And there was some kerfuffle over it, as we would expect. And some of the discussion I saw online was, well, why is this okay, and would a pro-choice banner be equally okay? People were offended by it. Whatever, I've got opinions about that, but so does this preclude then those kinds of things? Are those called social causes? Pro-life, pro-choice, LGBT, are those social issues that could not be then given banner space?
That would be, yeah, I think that's correct.
the point.
Yeah. Okay. So it'd just be Riverside 501c3s?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
But only if they're not political. That's what I'm understanding, right?
Right.
So.
If you need to share.
So just to clarify, what I think the intention is, right, is that 501(c)(3)s that are non-political, you're not blanketing 501(c)(3)s. Is that correct?
I don't understand. I'm sorry, I don't understand your question. Try it again.
So I think Mrs. Coffey said, if I understand correctly, that you were thinking 501(c)(3)s were allowable to post banners. However, what I thought I understood was 501(c)(3)s that are not political.
Correct. Correct.
Okay, so the pride flag would no longer be acceptable. That would be deemed divisive. Divisive, is that what you said?
Divisive is not used in the policy. That would fall under the banners that advocate, promote, debate, discuss, or relate to any social issue, cause, or event.
Okay. Okay. So those things would not be allowable.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
I have one just like implementation comment, and I'm sure that it will be updated, but the form that we have an example of, the online form for the banner submissions, it really needs to have all of this information in there.
Right, that's the
Okay.
current one. Since
Yeah.
we haven't memorialized the policy, it hasn't been incorporated. But
Okay, great.
Yeah, all that information will be available to anybody who wants to.
Okay.
Oh, there was one other logistical thing. I think it calls in here for people to provide artwork at the time of application. Whereas, on the other hand, if we want people to get applications in well in advance, they might not actually have the artwork yet. Is there some way of leaving that discretion to staff so that staff could take a look at the artwork when it's submitted?
I think they just take and they print out whatever they want to put up on the
Yeah,
paper.
but if I have something at the end of the summer that we're planning, and I want to go ahead and make sure I reserve my space, I might not have my banner designed yet.
The only reason why that was incorporated is because staff was concerned about the banner being designed and then being declined to be put
Yeah,
up.
I saw that in here, to not do it until it's been, banner should be manufactured prior to design approval. But I just wonder if it's realistic to ask people to necessarily turn in artwork at the time they turn their application in.
I think that burden needs to be on the applicant. I mean, it can be hand sketched, and as long as then there's some discretion on whether the actual copy meets the intent of the sketch.
As long as you can give them that kind of, as long as they don't have to actually.
I think we're clear that it's a draft. I think we're clear that don't spend a lot of money on this either, because we might turn it down.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about that sentence, and that bothered me too. I mean, it's not our business to tell them when they manufacture the banner. If they jump the gun and manufacture it before they get a permit and we say no, well,
Well, then they're.
Shame on you.
Right.
It's not our fault.
We're just trying to
Yeah,
give
but
them a
this
heads up.
covers
I know, but I mean, we should maybe advise people not to do that, but to say that's a requirement.
We'll take out the all caps. Anything else? Okay, let's move on to the next one. Next up is an ordinance amending the village code of the Village of Riverside, Illinois, relative to public parks. Ms. Francis.
It's me again.
Oh, do we, oh, so this is policy.
Yeah, that's the draft policy for
Do you
for
still
staff.
need a motion in a second?
Yeah, do you want to maybe have a motion in a
But
second
I
to
thought
approve
this
the
was
policy?
administrative. I thought the policy was going to be handled by staff.
It will, but commonly policies are adopted via motion.
I have a motion and a second to adopt the policy as submitted.
So
Mr.
moved.
Lumsden,
Second.
second by Ms.
With the
Mr.
changes
Cheese.
that we
With the changes.
we
With
talked
the
about.
changes that we've talked about.
Yep.
Anything else? Please call the roll.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Trustee Giza.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Sutton.
Aye.
Trustee Peters.
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay. Parks.
That is aye. So the village board and the Economic Development Commission and also the Parks and Recreation Board have discussed the various regulations relating to our public parks. This section of the village code was last updated in 1987. Based on the discussion at the previous board meeting, the ordinance as drafted allows for the following. Fishing is allowed, however, those aged 16 or older must obtain a valid state of Illinois fishing license. Boats or other water vessels can only be launched or retrieved at designated areas. Picnicking is allowed at the following parks: Swan Pond, Harrington Park, Guthrie Park, Centennial Plaza, Long Common Park, also known as Big Ball Park, Patriots Park, Scout Cabin, and Indian Gardens. Groups larger than 6 must apply for a permit to picnic and must apply for the permit 72 hours prior to the event. Use of a fire grill or fire pit or grill can only occur at Scout Cabin. Staff will implement a leave no trace policy, create a fishing program to educate children, and will create appropriate forms required for the picnicking permit. And as outlined, the ordinance is drafted, and staff is available if you have any additional questions.
Okay, so let's have a motion to approve the ordinance. Motion second. We'll discuss it.
Make a motion to approve the
Motion by
ordinance.
Mr. Pollak,
I'll second.
second by Ms. Peters. Discussion, questions? There was one item that was raised prior to the meeting by Trustee Giza with regard to clarifying that for groups larger than 6, there was some confusion at the last meeting. Some of us thought that we had actually kind of said that if you're larger than 6, it would only be at like Big Ball Park or Swan or a Scout Cabin. The thought was that there might be situations where you'd have groups larger than 6 at other parks, and so that should be left to the discretion of staff to determine whether a given group was appropriate for a given park. And Mr. Mars, do you want to read the language that you came up with to address this?
Sure. In subsection E, the first sentence reads, "No picnic, outing, or gathering of more than 6 persons may be held except at the following parks," and then there's a colon and it lists the parks. Right before the colon, we were going to add "subject to permitting procedures as established by the Parks and Rec Department." So it's clear that they have policies and make determinations as to what gatherings would be appropriate at what parks.
Just to give you a little bit of history, I asked Ron if he would mind giving me a total of the permits that were issued at the Scout Cabin. And as it sits today, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ron, over 95% of the time when people come for a permit to have and I think we need to talk about what a picnic is and what a social gathering is. Because I'd rather use the word organized event picnic, where, it could be 4 people, could be 10 people, but organized events have to be held at an area that is built for picnics, and that's really the Scout Cabin.
unless there's a specific reason why we don't go there. And some would be, you know, possibly a wedding or something like that. We've had that at times at Big Ballpark. But 95% or more happen at the Scout Cabin. Last year we had 35 events at the Scout Cabin, and this year, to date, we've had almost 28, with a vast majority of them being Riverside residents. We do have a few non-residents. Last year there was 3. This year there's been 5. So we don't get a lot of non-residents asking to do that, but it's a vast majority of residents. And this policy really does not do anything more than what we already do. People want to have an organized event. They can have an organized event, and it's going to be held where we feel it's best to be held. And 95% of that time is going to be at the Scout Cabin, because that's got bathrooms, it's got facility, it's got trash compactor, trash garbage cans, it has fire pits, it has everything that needs to be to have that kind of event. Now, picnic, you know, the word picnic, if you look it up, it's really an intimate gathering, generally between a few people, a couple people, or a family event. So I don't know if the number is necessarily, and I know we played around with this last time, whether we have 6 or whether we have 8. I think Bob said himself he has 5 in his family, so he couldn't have anyone else come to the village. So I don't know if it's necessarily a number or the type of event. If you have, you know, a couple families and you know, a few kids, and they go to Sawmillies and grab some sandwiches, or go to, you know, the bar and grab a pizza or whatever, and want to, you know, sit down in the park or sit down at Swan Pond and eat it. That's what we're about. I mean, that's Picnic Island. We should encourage that. So I don't know if the number is right, or if we should have a definition that what is, you know, I don't know. I don't like the idea of having, you know, saying you can't picnic, or picnicking you have to permit. I think it's more of the definition of what you're doing. And I think what we're trying to do is regulate social events where, you know, there's going to be games, there's going to be, you know, coolers, music, you know, barbecuing, things like that. Those are what we're trying to regulate. We're really not trying to regulate a couple families going down to Swan Pond and having a sandwich. So that's the way I would like to see the picnic. I don't know if we could somehow define that in there, but that's kind of where I was. Because
the only issue I see with that, though, Trustee Ballerine, is a family reunion. So 14, 15 people, and they say, but it's a picnic. It's intimate. It's an intimate gathering. This is all family. So it seems to me, I mean, the big fear that has kind of hovered over this whole discussion from the very beginning is kind of what you're pointing to. Is, you know, when I say picnic, you know, I envision what you're saying. You know, a few people, it's a blanket, and some fried chicken, and other people. You say picnic to other people, and they immediately go to the forest preserve, and there's 40 people and music and jumpy tents and grills. So it seems to me the cleanest way, and the fear of, you know, a litter and all that kind of thing, and making sure we have the right facilities, is just to put a number on it. I don't know how you're going to define picnic any more than I know how you're going to define litter, in a way that people can't say, well, you know, it is an intimate gathering. Now, with regard to that, though, and we all got the same email. You know, one resident did point out that, you know, 6 is awfully few. I mean, that pretty much prohibits any 2 families from going out to, you know, to Harrington and having a picnic.
What if we did 6 adults?
But isn't it just an arbitrary number in the end? Because
it is an arbitrary number.
If the Jesus and the Lumsdens go down and sit in the park next to each other, we're a family of 4 and he's a family of 3. We're done. But we're not done, because we're 2 separate families, so that's okay. I just think that we're narrowing this down. It went from 4 to 6. I mean, I just think that it's.
But at some number, 15 people becomes a large number. If you have two families and there's 15 people among the two families, that starts to look like a gathering. It starts to act a little like a gathering. So I agree with the number. I think maybe it's higher. I understand it's arbitrary, but at the same time, you can't have, you know, two families with 10 people in each family. That's 20 people out there.
No, I agree with you. But what I'm saying is that six is this number, but there could be two families picnicking in the same park. No one's going to care. I mean, you're picking a number, the number 6, and there's 8 people in the park. There's 8 people in the park. I don't think the police are going to go and chase them off.
I would just suggest that we raise it to 8.
Yeah. I mean, it's again,
Is that okay with everybody? 8, it's all right.
Yeah, I kind of wish we would have separated the picnicking piece, because there seems to be more.
Just 1 second.
More pros and cons about the picnicking portion than there is about some of the other activities of fishing or boat launching, as long as we control it in some manner to prevent trampling of things and stuff like that. I think the biggest challenge that, again, what we're really trying to preserve is the opportunity to walk through the park peacefully without some big bar mitzvah or something happening down there, right? A couple of families grabbing food at La Barra and Molly's or something like that and sitting there and eating it around their bicycles is kind of what we want to promote. So the challenge is, how do we balance that out, and how do we codify it, for lack of better words, that doesn't make it too restrictive, that gives the police the latitude to not have to bust everybody that has a sandwich in the park, which is where we are right now.
And since this is a new thing, I appreciate kind of the conservative incremental approach that the board has taken. So it seems to me if we say 8, and see how it works, and then if we feel in the future that it either needs to be more restrictive or more permissive, then we can always do that later. Mr. Wyatt, did you have something?
I honestly think you're not going to get much different than what we have right now.
I don't think so either.
I don't think you're going to see any different than
I don't
what's
think
going
you'll
on
see
right now.
any difference.
I think we all are generally in agreement with what we think we ought to do. But one thing I haven't even heard discussed here or mentioned, and I've read a little bit of the background of this too, is enforcement. Well, who's enforcing this? And how do we do it right now? I sort of suspect that the only reason that we would go over to any of our parks and do something is if somebody, complained about it. And are we going to do that, or are we going to increase the village staff and put in a picnic inspector or whatever? And I don't mean to be light about it, but one of the problems you have when you try to over-regulate something, over-define something that is in the community like this, is I think, open yourself up to the little old lady who's sitting there that doesn't want anything, and she calls up and complains about everything, and then Tom and his people have to go over there and make it look like we're not a very welcoming community. And that's the concern that I personally have, and I think that's the concern that a lot of people have. We do want people to use the parks. Even Olmsted wanted people to use the parks, but the question is, if we have somebody come in with an organized event, I agree that we need to have some way of dealing with it. I mean, but if just a community, if Wendell and Scott go over there with their families and they have 7 people instead of 6 or 8 people instead of 6, I mean, and somebody calls up, what are you going to do? I mean, that's the thing that troubles me about.
But Mr. White,
that's why we're doing it right now.
Yeah, but I mean, actually, in my opinion, it cuts the other way, because right now it's prohibited altogether. So this actually will reduce the enforcement issue, because right now, since it's blanketly prohibited, you'd have to have the police, looking at anybody that was down there. So this actually is more lenient and will put less of a burden on our staff. Any other questions about this?
I had just another implementation point, and I'm going to reveal my the novelty of my Riverside-ness, since I've only been here 10 years. But one of the things that I see when I see this, it took me many years to figure out which parks are which. So it would be great if, when we're implementing this, we can have a map that shows people. If we're really going to be welcoming to this idea of picnicking, let's have a map that shows people where these are. Because I literally was probably 2 or 3 years ago that I figured out where Indian Gardens was. I know, but.
There's one on the website.
Great map, yeah, on the website.
But I mean, to identify for people who are applying for these permits
That's a really good
or
idea.
for wanting to picnic, yes, yeah.
Okay. Rod, Mr. Macchietti is shaking his head yes, so that.
Oh, it exists?
No, consider that, no, it will be.
It's certainly something we can do.
Okay, great.
We have a map in our program brochure now that lists all of our locations, including the parks. So it's something that we could definitely attach to
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
permit process.
Should be easy.
The boating aspect, boats or other water vessels, I would assume those are going I mean, should it be said that those are not motorized water vessels? But can only be launched or retrieved at designated areas. We have no designated areas. We have no, I mean.
But there will be, I mean, staff will.
Yeah, but if you're gonna have a designated area, you have to build a boat launch. You just can't. I mean,
No, you can.
Yeah, I don't
you
think
can
you have
launch
to. I
it.
think the key, what we were trying to do, again, what was trying to accomplish with that is to not have them trampling over everywhere. So we locate it in 5 or 6 locations. Public Works or Parks and Rec, whoever wants to, has those identified on a map. And then the other thing we don't want is we don't want a whole bunch of signs down there that says, launch your boat here, or take your boat out here, or no boat launching, every 10 feet down the river. We don't want any of that. I think the key there was to come up with a spot down by Scout Cabin, come up with one over by Forest Avenue, maybe one down right by the library there, right in downtown town, and then maybe one down the river a little bit farther that's already being used, and try and focus the attention there so that people aren't stomping over everything all the way along it.
My only worry is if we don't have, I mean, if we designate something as a boat launch, I would assume then we have the responsibility to make sure it's a safe boat launch. So I would rather say something like we recommend the launching of boats at Forest Preserve issued launch sites, because there are several of them along the river. We will, I just don't know if we can, we don't, I mean, unless we're going to put money into boat launches. If we say you can boat launch behind the Scout Cabin and we don't have it maintained, and you go down there and you fall.
That's not what this says. This says no person shall launch or retrieve any boat. It doesn't say you have to use a boat launch. It says you can retrieve or launch your boat.
But
right, but if we don't have a launch, if you don't have something built for them to do that, and they get hurt.
If you're concerned about mitigating some of our potential exposure to.
Liability, yes.
Correct. We can have our risk pool come out and assess the locations and then give us recommendations and work in cooperation with Parks and Rec.
As it reads right now, we don't have.
Right.
Which is okay, that's phase 2, right?
Exactly.
So right now.
Exactly.
Again, I think that there's a really good opportunity here on fishing, and that's kind of why I wish we would have broke this out into 4 pieces, because I think there's specific issues that make it plausible and harder to manage on them. Like for the fishing piece, we talked a little bit, some of us had talked about having a sticker that you give the kids so that then they have to read a little book and it tells them how to be, conserve the river, take care of the river, and not trash the river, right? Because the biggest complaint you'll get from fishing is people leaving worm containers and trash and things like that laying around, or throwing them up onto the bike path, and then somebody else walking peacefully has an issue with that. So that's when we become confrontational with each other in the village. So I think that's one way that we could mitigate that and turn something that's a challenge into a positive and a learning environment, right? And again, I think the big issue right now is right now everything we do, that all of us do in town, seems to be illegal right now. And in all honesty, you should be writing us tickets all the time. Thank God you don't. You use some good judgment on that. So I think trying to figure out how we do that properly is a good thing. And I think the same thing could go with those that are village folks that use their kayaks, that you can launch in town and you can pull out in town. Might be kind of fun to have one down by the river where you just pull them up on the bank and you can walk over to Molly's and have a pint and then get back in, or walk over. I mean, that's what we're trying to promote without having the downside where we have to then put a paved boat launch downtown. We don't want that, right? So how do we mitigate that? And a little brochure that Parks and Rec puts together that has 5 little dots of the recommended, approved, designated, whatever term you want to use, is I think all we need to do and not overthink this thing.
Mr. White?
Question on fishing, are you talking only about
No,
fishing from
the microphone, please.
Are you talking only about fishing from the shoreline, or are you talking about people entering the river to fish? Because you do see people down in the Swan Pond area in particular, fly fishing down there from time to time.
Well, once they're in the river, once they're in the river, they're out of our jurisdiction. That's a navigable waterway, so we can't regulate that anyway. The only thing that we can regulate would be from the banks. And what this contemplates is people will be able to fish from the banks unless it's otherwise posted.
No, I understand. My question was, are we trying to do anything about people being in the river? Because I don't think that's necessarily a good idea, because it creates an obligation for the village. They have to go in and rescue them if something happens.
We can't. That's federal jurisdiction.
Okay, thank you.
I do, coming back to your point though, do we want to say something about motorized vessels? Because it's just, I mean, in theory, right now, somebody could put a little.
There are already 2 jet skis over on the Lions side of the river right now, parked over there.
I saw those over there.
Yeah.
So, do we want to prohibit motorized vessels?
It does say motorized vehicle. No person shall operate a motorized vehicle upon or across any public park, parkway, or public sidewalk within the village.
Remember, they're not going to be operating a wave runner on the grass.
They're not operating at that point.
Well, Mr. Mars, so once it's on the water, we can't regulate.
We don't have control over
But
that.
we could say launching of motorized vessels are prohibited.
Yeah, there's a couple of guys that have kayaks that have little outboard trolling.
Well, see, I was thinking about that.
They
You
go
know,
up there.
some
So
people might
I don't
wanna
think
have,
that, I mean, the
as a
river's,
backup, but
90% of the
safety
time, the
issue.
river's not deep enough to run anything with a motor without beating the crap out of the propeller. I guess you got jet boats. It could be a little bit awkward, but I don't see that. I think we're overthinking it.
Okay, let's leave that out. Okay. If it becomes an issue, we'll deal with it.
Because we always have the nuisance code. I mean, the nuisance code, if there's somebody down there and they get a jet boat driving up the river crazy like, the nuisance code will get them on that. And reckless driving and all sorts of other great opportunities.
Yeah, we get jurisdiction.
We're on jurisdiction over.
They could come from upriver.
No, but if they beach it on the land, that's what I'm saying.
Anything else?
One other question. I just want to make sure I understand what we're doing here correctly regarding picnicking. We're saying that, I guess we're changing it to 8 persons.
Yes.
And we're saying that you can picnic in these designated parks with any number of people, but if you have 8 or more, you need a permit?
More than 8.
More than 8.
You need a permit.
Where does it say that you can picnic with 6 people or 4 people? I don't see it. I just see where it says that no picnic with more than 6, more than 8. I mean, it seems like we ought to come right out and say, you can picnic in these parks only, because if we're silent on it, someone could read it and say, well, then I can picnic anywhere I want to, except for a parkway. But that,
Well, if it's not prohibited, we don't go through and list everything you can do. We go through and list what you can't do.
But I think what he's saying is that you can only picnic in these parks.
what's
And that aspect is not encompassed in this. Right? So you can only picnic in these listed parks
Well, that's.
It says right here, it says no picnicking, outing, or gathering.
of more than 6 people.
Should may be held except for the following locations. Because what we don't want, the way I understood it, is we don't want people in the parkways and things like that having picnics.
I mean, I have to say, I stumbled over that language too. I thought that language is a little tortured about the, maybe held except at the following parks. It might be better if we could somehow be more active that, picnics, outings, or gatherings of up to 8 persons
I think
are allowed at
what I would
these
suggest, is that to say that picnicking is limited to the following parks, period, and list the parks. In addition, any picnic with more than 8 people requires a permit.
That's fine, because these are the places that we have trash cans, right? These are the places that we actively
We
pick
don't
up
want
trash.
people picnicking
Anywhere except here.
anywhere except these parks, even if it's 2 people.
Right, and that's because this is where we have the facilities to handle. And also keep in mind that in the materials that, you know, we are going to press forward with the leave no trace policy as well. But yeah, if we can clean that, you get what people.
Absolutely, yes,
Okay.
that sounds good.
Anything else? Please call the roll.
Trustee Pollak.
Aye.
Trustee Giza.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Sedgwick.
Aye.
Trustee Peters.
Aye.
Motion carries. And last up, an ordinance amending the village code of the Village of Riverside, Illinois, relative to the Safe Environment Commission. Ms. Ray.
This section of the village code was last modified in 1998. The Safe Environment Commission last met in September 2016. Based on the inactivity of the commission, it is recommended that the commission be dissolved. If an issue that was previously handled by the commission arises, then the board may appoint an ad hoc committee at that time. Staff recommends approval. I just wanted to point out that staff is aware that there are certain commissions and committees that are listed in section 2-1-3 that perhaps are no longer active as well, and we'll work on additional modification of those items to the village code. However, those are a little bit more involved, and so staff is just recommending the ordinance as outlined currently.
And just so everybody knows, I actually contacted all the existing commissioners of the Safe Environment Commission, and they have no objection to this. So I'd ask for a motion to approve the ordinance. Motion by Mr. Loveston, second by Mr. Valerie. Questions, comments? Please call the roll.
Trustee Pollak.
Aye.
Trustee Giza.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Sedgwick.
Aye.
Trustee Peters.
Aye.
Motion carries. Any new business this evening? We have no need for an executive session. I'd ask for a motion second to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Lumsden,
Second.
second by Mr. Giza. Please call the roll.
Trustee Pollak.
Aye.
Trustee Giza.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Sedgwick.
Aye.
Trustee Peters.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Good night. Go Cubs.